Hello, everybody. My name is Eric Danhoff, and I am a little indie author from Chicago, Illinois, and I'm excited to be a part of Cyberpunk Day. Last year, I connected with so many cool people on Twitter. I watched all the authors' readings and watched clips of Venus, and I said, next year I want to be part of that. So here I am. Latest project is not so much cyberpunk, but there are elements of science fiction, some fantasy. There's a Lovecraftian style story. There's ARG style story. The cover art, which you saw a few minutes ago, and the paintings within were illustrated by my daughter, and it's called Diamond Blood. It's, I think, my finest work, so I'm very proud of it. I'll put a link somewhere where you can click on it and check it out. But today, I'm going to be reading you the first few pages of my cyberpunk story, Revenant Sun. So this came out 2015, re-released in 2020 as audiobook, narrated by Sean DeRager, which he did a phenomenal job. So this is sort of like my shout out to him. And I guess I wanted to set the scene for everybody for Revenant Sun, because it has the usual trappings of cyberpunk. You have the sort of omnipresent AI. You have data streams that are constantly feeding you information, even when you sleep, influencing you. So that is the sort of setting that we're walking into with my book. And what I want to do with this, I want to read the first 4 or 5 pages to kind of set up a scene that sets the pace for what's to come. So what I wanted to do when I wrote the beginning of the book, I wanted to do something a little bit different, something to throw off the reader and make them question what was happening around them. So what I ended up doing was I wrote a scene that started as a regular narration, a regular scene, and then at a certain point it breaks off into sort of a fourth wall break, and you realize that the crime scene that you're now witnessing is more of a collage of clips from different news outlets, all that information sort of being pasted together as a demonstration of the power of the technology called New Dawn, which is the same program that is feeding, influencing the people of the city. So I'll go ahead and I'll get started, and thank you very much. The screen of the computer reflected white lights against open eyes. Sirens were in full scream from the outside. Distant shades of crimson and ocean-coated, dilated pupils. Glass shattered loud enough to elicit movement from the man barely awake. The hotel room was a small, dark cube, littered with enough trash and wires to resemble the inside of a failed machine. His body was an apt comparison. A cocktail of drugs weaved through a bloodstream squeezed of oxygen. Gunshots were faded, but loud enough to raise the tempo of his heartbeat. The windows near him shattered. Hands moved across the table and swept away half-eaten food for the device. Liquid had pooled out from his eyes and mouth, dripping slowly. They were coming for him. A metal surface came into contact with an anxious hand. His fingers scrambled for the activator on the top of the device. Sounds of storms pushed their way through weak walls. A clicking noise began to emanate from the metal sphere near the center of the table. The man slowly got to his feet and reached in his pockets. A gun was left in the corner on the kitchen counter. Tripping over spare parts, he grabbed the pistol and left. The hallway went in 2 directions, both neon lit. He made a decision. Blue lines followed each turn of his head. Movements were exaggerated. The air was heavy. It forced him to struggle. Behind him, wood splintered underneath a steel battering ram. They did not take time to shout his name or to announce his arrest. The goal was blood. Within the darkness of the room, the sphere ignited, littered paper and old wood. Equipment burned within seconds, along with several cops. Boots melted, Powder blue uniforms seared with the sound that was buried by their own screams. A window cracked open led to the fire escape. The stairs were rusted brown and made too much noise as he descended. Garbage piled up near a dumpster looked like a safe landing. There were still 5 levels. In minutes, cruisers would find their way around to the alley below. The gun almost slipped from his hand with each jump to the next scaffold. He decided to try it and poured himself over the railing. His body smashed into the pile. No feelings of pain. He thanked the drugs, shaking off what could have been a broken rib. The hand holding his gun felt an extra spur of bone pressing underneath the skin. At the end of the road, past the intersection, was the entrance to an old aqueduct. The lights ripped away comfortable dark. They moved faster than usual tonight. He hopped over the fence, tearing holes in his jeans on barbed wire decades old. The hotel was further away now, covered in all sirens and lights. Swift footsteps marked the night with percussive beats. He still knew how to move despite the handicap of chemicals in his system. Step by step through emptied alleys. That was all he knew, really. Systems and how to break them down. All a hacker really did in his mind was destroy an existing wall to help build a better one. Step by step, the beats increased in speed. Systems he knew, and also chemicals. He loved those. Just like a body, in that when one is pushed to its maximum potential, it will soon falter. The process of breaking down can take years. Even as the functions of a machine continue without flaw, better ones will be formed and pushed out to the audience. Knowledge of the turns and twists leads to manipulation by curious minds. The entrance to the aqueduct was an open tunnel down a slope of beaten concrete. Cool air from flowing water coated him with a certain comfort. Lights behind him grew bright. The voices telling him to stop were more vicious. Once a system is figured out by said minds, it can be stretched into something else. It becomes a weapon in an arsenal. People were ignorant to the real movement behind their own technology. Countless names became a currency at a young age. His legs pumped new blood, less enamored with the drugs. Hand over hand, he climbed to an overhead slum, tucked away from the main roads. Platforms held makeshift houses for those unable to live in townhouses and compacted apartments high above the storm that followed him. Cops would not interrogate the homeless. No need to ask questions. They knew exactly who he was and where he was going. Kids began to follow him across the platform when bullets found their way through the metal. Screaming interrupted the tempo as some of the children found themselves target in the blind fire. Little bodies hit the platform hard, but he smiled. No need for sorrow. Life was temporary as it was. Beneath the slum was a garden of dead grass. Faded flowers struggled along in private corners. Looking down, he saw through chain-link fence to see dirty toys and old tools. There must have been a switch. Uniforms of blue finally bashed their way into the slum from the streets below. He stopped and counted the seconds while stomping his foot along the poles of the fence. Soon, the pressure point triggered, and the fence disconnected from the platform. He hit the ground hard enough to elicit a laugh. Cops shined flashlights down into the garden before descending. His hood ripped open, shredded even more on brambles and weeds. He hoped for an opening out to the road. A hole, small even for a child, was there. His body was thin enough to slide through. The main road was more than 30 feet away. Freedom was, too. Once that new wall is built, the hacker is tasked with starting over that same process, studying the target, adaptation to its pattern, discovery of any anomalies, exploitation of said advantages. Once the new weapon is added to the arsenal, the prize claimed in the meantime is open to the world of commerce. The supply and demand of private information was always a business of risk. It was the only reason for the bullets behind him. He could see the aqueduct entrance dip down behind the street. The legs of this machine were tired. His fingers traced the bone sticking out from the others, wondering when he would find time to get it looked at. The sound of his body smashing into metal and glass was sickening. His limp body was thrown off into the distance. The black car did not take a moment to slow down. Unseen, the driver knocked a bigger hole into the windshield before disappearing into black. Sirens returned in broken echoes. Blood and blue sea washed over his eyes. Both legs felt different. Something must have broken in each of them. Steps were made carefully. He could put his weight down. It was enough to try running again. Weapons were pointed. Those same voices were now hoarse. They promised death if he took the chance to run for water. The buildings all around him were filled, shadows hidden behind glass as yellow poured out into the street from each square. Unknown faces looked into him. His lips curled into a smile. There was just enough chemicals in the system to keep him from fear. Life was temporary, wasn't it? One hand moved from the bone in his side to the pistol in his pocket, and the screams became louder. It was a surprise to him that they did not fire right away. Maybe if he took it out and started shooting it? Once the gun came out, his face became stone. The clip was missing. It had been left in the hotel room. Every other weapon in a 1-block radius emptied enough bullets to rip him apart. It was not fast enough to keep his face from changing back to a smile. He hit the ground hard. His legs peeled back as if the bones were removed from the skin. The back of his head smashed into the pavement. It created a haze that distracted him from overwhelming pain. His eyes stayed open, staring into the night sky. The medical teams arrived within a minute. 2 men burst through the back door of the transport unit, items in hand to grab the body in the middle of the street. A hand grabs each of them at the arm. A few feet away sat a black car, a hole in the windshield. 2 new men stood in black suits behind them. Their holsters were exposed from the folds of their tailored jackets. Each held a large gun that poured out with each step from the shadows. The world went black for a second. The medic stood frozen. His eyes were stone. Darkness and light repeated over and over, as if someone were toying with a light switch. The picture returned and disappeared again just as quickly. Existence was suspended. The film had fallen off the reel. Everything stopped for a few awkward seconds. The colors of the image came and went with the whirring sounds of a broken projector. Somewhere in that same dark, there was a voice that spoke calmly.
It felt real, didn't it?